90% of our enterprise pipeline comes from calling. None of it comes from email.
It's a follow-up. I certainly think it's email today, which has just become so cluttered and crowded.
Give a words of wisdom to your younger self.
Just sit with uncertainty. It's okay. You don't need to have the answer for everything.
What is actually working on the fields?
In the 2 years that sees the gradual death of email as a means of communication.
Well, this is season 2 of Funnel Vision, where we bring on the most renowned sales leaders to discuss the role AI's kind of implementing in driving transformative change in sales teams, and also how high-performance teams are enabled in 2025 to deliver the most success. I'm here today with Stuart, who's the go-to-market VP at Couchbase, has had a renowned career, 2 decades in the field, starting firstly as an account manager, working up to kind of leading EMEA at Oracle, and then working towards becoming the go-to-market VP of Strategy and Global Field Enablement at Couchbase. So pleasure to have you here today on the show.
Thank you, Leo. Absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite and really looking forward to the conversation.
Very good. I'd like to start off with just understanding a bit more about your early years. Not many people directly go into sales, is often a path that you meander into. Now, just talk me through your early years and I guess what led you to the point from university to deciding to take that first plunge and become a account management in the sales field.
Yeah, no, you're right. No one grows up wanting to be in sales. I mean, I've even had to, I think, put off one of my older children at some point thinking about a sales career, I think when they were 8 at some point, but we got some sense into them. Yeah, so I studied at university and studied geography, specialising in human geography. And one thing that I probably didn't realise at the time, but one of the important parts of that is that discipline is all around connecting people and place. And so if you take that place to be the current situation of a business or where they're in, or an actual geographic place, and why settlements, often form around flat coastal areas rather than cliffs because of it's easier to shipping. I think some of those things and just a use of data and analysis were, good foundations that I was able to use later. I didn't start in sales. I ended up actually working as in customer service for Novell on a temporary contract. And then, as I always try and do, make a good impression and work hard. That resulted in, when there was an opportunity to go into inside sales there, joining Novell in 1998. And as you kind of alluded to there, as most people do, stumbling into my first sales role.
That's great to hear. And I do understand that from the geographic perspective, you have the science and the art of selling. And it sounds as if you were advancing quite quickly in the early stages of your career. And what do you think it was about your character that ultimately kind of brought those embedded sales characteristics to make you successful from out the gate?
Yeah, I think an interest in an inherent curiosity was probably the thing in my character that really helped the most in those early stages. I can remember an early conversation that I had when, after being in inside sales, I moved into the account management side at Novell, externally facing, after about a year or so. And I can remember, and you can imagine in those days, 23, maybe 24, and looked a hell of a lot younger than that probably at the time, meeting with the IT director for Honda in the UK, and this wizened guy who'd been in the industry for years and years asking me, what are you going to tell me? Like, what can you tell me? And I remember saying to him, John, I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm just going to ask you some questions, and we're going to try and learn together about if there's any way we can work together. And you could see him kind of, okay. And I started asking questions, and it led to actually a project and working together, not initially, but in 3 months from there. And really it's that curiosity, and maybe something we'll touch on about like the future as well, that I always try and, as a characteristic, try and hire around. I try and look for people who are hungry, humble and smart, but really inside that, just an inherent curiosity about anything. It doesn't have to be about that product or what they do. But I think in my early stages of my career, that really helped me, because when you don't know anything, you don't really then have the baseline of thinking, I'm trying to do it a certain way. I was also very lucky that as a multinational company, and one that Dr. Eric Schmidt was the CEO a lot of the time I was there, so quite a forward-looking company as well, there was lots of opportunities for training, whether it was in systems thinking, the use of visualization, or spin selling. There was lots of enablement for younger people in the industry to try and learn. So that's why in my current role now, I think it's very important that, whilst enablement is very different than it was in 1998 when I started. I mean, I can remember when Y2K was a thing, which I'm sure a lot of your, AI native audience who are working in go-to-market now will be like, what was that all about? But I think that from that moment, set me on a path to enjoy the discipline of sales because it allows you to spend time with what's my favourite carbon-based life form, humans.
And I think you touched on a really important point around the impact and importance of curiosity. And the sale always starts with discovery and asking quality, consultative, and questions that ultimately get your buyer to open up. And it's largely driven by the necessity and desire to learn and want to put yourself in the shoes of the buyer persona. And I'm curious to understand a bit more on that basis around the endeavors that you took to learn and the training programs at the time. As we know, sales fundamentals still persist, even in an AI revolution today where, there's lots of new ways of thinking and working. But what enablement and training programs were put into place then that are still relevant and fundamental now?
I think a process-driven approach to selling, whichever that was. So like I say, I learned the kind of Miller-Hyman spin selling kind of approach first, latterly learned Medic, Challenger sale, probably most recently. And having a baseline and a framework, I think, was really important. But the biggest learning that I had probably at that time around enablement, and the thing that's I've taken personally, and then when I've gone into the enablement side used as well, was a very simple learning progression model, which shows, I think, how some things get missed. So 6 stages from introduction, explanation, introduction, and demonstration as those first stages. So think about riding a bike. Your parents will say, this is a bike, it has 2 wheels, the pedals, and you push the pedals and it goes. I'm going to demonstrate that. So maybe, a 6-foot man gets on a tiny bicycle and tries to ride it. Looks a bit ungainly, but you kind of get the idea. Now, a lot of the time, you're probably not going to expect little Johnny, put him at the top of the hill, slap him on the back, and he's going to fly down this hill. But when it comes to learning, especially adult learning and professional learning, we expect that. Right, I've told you how this works. I've given you the demonstration. You should be able to do it. And this model really works on that there are 2 stages that maybe gets missed. And that's practice and experimentation. Because until that point, I'd believed the well-known phrase, practice makes perfect. Well, if you practice, you play golf and you keep practicing, but you've got a bad golf swing, then you're not making it perfect, you're just reinforcing something. So what practice does is kind of make things permanent. So what I learned through that is try things, experiment, see how that works, adjust. And then get to a point where you have something that you're really happy with, practice that, and then you're in confident use. Then you're in a place where you can actually use that. And so that's probably the biggest model I've used in all enablement programs and change management and trying to get things into teams I've worked with, is recognizing that you can't expect to get to that demonstration level and people are going to be able to execute. And that gap to that execution is what can really make the difference in people and in teams.
That's super insightful. And ultimately, I see this as the build, measure, learn feedback loop, akin to how you build products and learn from users and perpetually innovate and adapt. It's similarly to sales. And the best sellers ultimately are looking for those compounding 1% improvements that they can make every day to drive the most outcomes. And those sellers inherently have high degrees of self-awareness, are able to reflect on each and every interaction they're having with the customer, and it's that desire for excellence that makes them strive to want to, perpetually improve the way that they sell. And I know that you've been to a number of different organizations at this stage through your sales career. Oracle obviously stands out in your CV as a point in time where you had quite quick progression, and there's obviously it's a well-renowned brand, and you're there at an exciting time in their journey. So just talk us through the experience at Oracle and what some of the key learnings were over your tenure.
Oracle was a great time, and as a young lad growing up in the sprawling metropolis of Bracknell, Berkshire, You kind of knew who Oracle was before you knew who Oracle was, because they were first headquartered there, had one of the offices with their logo on. When I went into Oracle, you're right, it was an interesting time. I joined, and then coincidentally, it was obviously clearly nothing to do with this, the acquisition spree kind of starting with PeopleSoft. And through the 7-8 years I was there, I think Oracle acquired about 65 different companies. A huge amount of things that I learned, and people I still speak to now, and friends and colleagues from that time. But a few things that were very important there. Again, a bit like Novell with Oracle, when it came to investment in their people, especially at that time, I was going into my first kind of real leadership role. I've done kind of hybrid sales manager, but you're still running the business as well. It was the first time that I'd been through any kind of formal leadership training. And that was very important, because it surrounded you with a group of people who were at different stages of their leadership journey, some more experienced, some the same as me, just getting started. And it gave you a great baseline of that kind of feedback loop of seeing, not just for you trying things, but seeing 20, 30 people trying things and observing their feedback loops, which was great. And then the other part of that acquisition journey was, the important part of any acquisition is not really how well does the product fit and integrate, you can make things work together, but is that how well do the people and the business fit and integrate? And saw examples of great technology that landed really well because of the people and the leadership and their approach as they came into the acquiring company. And then those that have probably had preconceptions about what Oracle was and the way it operated, because there was a reputation of, hey, Oracle's very hard. If you don't make your number, you're getting the sack every year and all these types of things. When actually, the reality was different. It was no different than any other business when it came to performance management, in my experience. But that process of acquiring companies and change management was a great foundation for me, because you got to see not just a database business, as I started with, and became an applications business, a middleware business, a business intelligence business. So you acquired so many different things that the scope of technology you were involved in as well became greater. Latterly, the last role I was doing, running the EMEA ISV and OEM business in that region, meeting with significant, Agfa Healthcare, IFS, companies that their technology relied on your product, but the breadth then allowed you to get involved in lots of other different parts of their business. And so whatever change management lessons I think I learned from there are really important, as well as the leadership lessons as well, which were not just from the people training, but like I say, from the colleagues and peers that I got to experience that with.
And I guess it's learning change management at the deep end, having 60 acquisitions to integrate and ensure that each one of those is successful in their own rights, and go-to-market, of course, being a huge driver. And on that, I'm curious to understand, I guess, how you're able to standardize the approach with integrating so many new companies around how you're thinking about go-to-market, how you could get the cross-cultural alignment of bringing new people in, and ultimately what kind of proliferated strategies would be used for all of those to drive results.
Yeah. I've always liked simplicity. I think as a simple person myself, it helps me to understand a framework as well as articulate and explain it to others. And I stole the Ansoff matrix. So there's one example, right? So it's a simple 2x2, new customers, existing customers, new products, existing products, other way around. And really just applied that to the ISV business to say, well, if I'm a software company working with Oracle, or I'm just a software company in general, I'm going to be trying to do these 4 things. I'm trying to service my existing customers. I'm trying to take new offerings into those existing customers, find new ones for my existing product, or do the really hard thing, which is go and create a new market. And so built this approach, which then allowed effectively everyone who's working with an ISV in EMEA, whether they were in the field, in the strategic team, in the EMEA Alliances and Channels team, to just understand that business and just talk to them about, what are you doing? Not how much technology can we sell? Look at these great new products we've got. So what are you trying to do? So if that company was, I don't know, our strategy is, look, we've got a good set of existing base and we want to add more functionality to our product. We've tried with reporting, the feedback's poor. So then the focus is, well, Oracle Discoverer, Oracle BI, data warehousing. you build an added data part of your application. And so you're doing something that is in line with their strategy, frictionless with their strategy, not trying to go against it. And that was the approach that, one of the successful approaches there, which fast forward to Couchbase, happens to be another, primarily database business as Oracle's ISV business was at the time. But I just took a simple approach, and it wasn't the same Ansoff metrics, but it was just a 4-box. I said, well, if I'm building an app, which is really the people who care about Couchbase. So our customers are like a lot of the, look at your software, people aren't going to buy 2 real-time sales intelligence platforms. They're going to standardize on one. Bigger examples are things like Workday for HR or finance systems. You buy one and you typically buy that top down. So you pitch to the stakeholders, you get the users comfortable. With a database, it's a bottoms up approach. You've got, especially in big companies, thousands, tens of thousands maybe of developers and architects choosing technologies to build apps that have to solve the business problem they've been tasked with. And so thinking of that audience, well, there's really only 2 things. There's an easy way of capturing this, which is, where is this in the software lifecycle? Is this in pre-production, they're just getting started, or is it a production app? And do they know about Couchbase already or not? We have a free tier. We have a community edition. So a lot of people have built apps through that. They then go into production. So again, it's one of those 4 boxes. It gives us 4 sales motions that now everyone in the world can identify from, hey, this company could be doing thousands of different things, this aperture, down to, all right, I now know what they're trying to achieve with this, and I can run the right playbook for that. Because talking to someone who's got an idea for an application at a very early stage, you go in and start talking about multi-year agreements and how you're going to purchase something. Whoa. This doesn't feel like what I need to. Whereas if you've got someone who's already built an app, got it into production on the free tier, but now is struggling to scale, well, then you're talking about a different set of drivers. Whereas before, we were kind of trying to treat everyone in a very similar way. So for me, it's just, how can you take your landscape of what you're trying to do in your product and ICP, and then make it as simple as possible for repeated execution from the field?
And I think it's so easy to overcomplicate products as well. Lots of facets to the feature set, lots of different ICPs. And ultimately, it's about doing one thing well and being famous for a certain thing within a product line. The expression goes is to simplify and then to multiply. I guess once you've figured out where it is in that life cycle, you can decide, are we going to charge forwards at 10x the pace, or is there still some product development to do before we double down? But I think having those discussions where you can figure out what the product truly is, who it serves, what the intrinsic pains are, and simplifying down a really complex technical product like a database solution per se helps to put it in the language of the buyer persona. And you also talk to the fact that I guess they could be in a few different scenarios. Do they have an existing database tool? Do they not have an existing database tool? Are they learning or are they buying? How are you thinking about, I guess, the concept of decision trees within a given call, where there could be 4 or 5 different scenarios of the buyer journey, and using that as an enablement tool to help kind of drive the right outcomes within sales cycles early on, and of course as they progress through the life cycle?
The benefit of that kind of simplified approach and then running it with a process is you can get a much smaller next step. So let's take a choose opportunity, which for us is someone that doesn't know Couchbase and they've got a pre-production application that they're just getting started with. Our first goal is get them enabled on the free tier, get them plugged into the community, get them as part of our sessions that we're doing to just help people understand how the product works. At scale means that you'll get enough people that come out of that process to the, now I want some help by doing an actual POC. I want to actually try and prototype something and build it, and I need your help with that. So you just try and break down to, well, what's the next logical step that person can do versus where do I want to get to? It's the same with any kind of system. I mean, a lot of the reason that certainly up until recently I probably failed with health initiatives is trying to think of the outcome at the end of trying to get to that. It's why my father was a great guitarist and tried a few times to teach me. But and this is obviously different when you're a 9, 10-year-old kind of learning, but when you see someone who's an expert in something, let's say you've got a junior seller who sees the guy that's just done the multi-million deal, was the top of the leaderboard, salesperson of the year. It's often very tempting. I want to do what that person does. But you can't look at that outcome. You got to look at, well, what was the journey? What were the steps that they did to become that great musician or that great salesperson? And so I think by breaking these things down, you give everyone the ability to be an expert in those different things. I'm trying to convert this person that knows nothing about Couchbase to know more. Well, that's something I can do, whether I'm in my first sales role as an inside sales rep, having been promoted from an SDR, or a 25-year veteran who's just done a deal for $10 million with a company. So I think it's breaking down these things to this is what you can physically do about it, that also makes, I think, the reward system feel like you want to keep going as well. I know for the teams that I work with, a lot of the things they appreciate is how we don't try and enable everything at the same time on a product, but try and do it as they're working. So you're doing it not just in that way, but reinforced by seeing the signals inside, various systems, helping to pre-write emails that they can send, but you do things in the flow rather than get to that outcome. So I think for me anyway, the days of big enablement, if you like, kind of big learning program certification, in the complexity of the world we live in now, often are a barrier to getting to that execution, and therefore that kind of micro learning is much better, especially when combined with doing it as you're actually doing the task that you're there to do anyway.
Yeah, and inherently the large outcome can be daunting, and it can seem far away 100%. As well. So breaking that down into a micro set of steps and almost gamifying that process where the reps can get those quick wins each and every day that incentivizes them, keeps them motivated, and then helps them striving towards becoming that President's Club winner at the top of the sales leaderboard, which is a vision to have, but it starts firstly with what can I do today to deliver on that outcome.
And I remember that very vividly at Novell, looking at the senior sellers and the top guy who was working with financial services in the UK and I'm trying to be like that person. And it caused me no end of problems by trying to get to that point without putting in the work of the journey. Now, AI tools, technology, things that are out there can help us get to that more efficiently, but I don't think they can cut out steps in the journey. You still have to kind of go through that thing to do it. And so that daunting view of I want to be like this person or achieve this, you're much healthier by breaking it down to what's the foundations that enable that to just happen naturally.
And on the theme of AI, there's a lot of misleading hype that's out there right now. Quite frankly, a lot of BS in the industry, AI washing going on. The go-to-market enablement stack is also getting flooded from all facets to AI SDRs that claim to replace your whole SDR team and book a gazillion meetings a week, to, on the other end of the spectrum, those chasing the reality of trying to replace salespeople and create digital twins. Now, how do we separate the signal from the noise in this market where there's a lot going on and figuring out what actually matters for go-to-market teams?
I mean, you hope that the more egregious examples of this, like a builder.ai, get found out through the processes that find them out, whether it's financial malfeasance, whether it's pretending something's technology and it's a person doing the work behind it. Taking those extreme examples out, then it's important that we look at it in as natural a way as possible to the way in which you're working with these tools. We've been in a situation where on the go-to-market tool set, and I remember the marketing world of when it was Marketo and the early stages of things like that, to then going to, you need a magnifying glass to look at the sheet of logos with all of this tech. 3 years ago, sales kind of go-to-market tech was a one slide that you could kind of fit. And again, it's a magnifying glass to see all these logos with how many things have just been spun up and different ways of doing it. Certainly weekly, I'll have someone in the sales organization, someone in the field will say, hey, this tool, we should use this. Half the time, we've already got something that does that and they just aren't using it, or I prefer this tool. So there's a lot of trying to, for us anyway, show the value they've got in things that they already use. So use the things that are there. I think some of this misleading stuff about replacement, there's a progression through from improving processes to augmenting the people to fully autonomous selling. And in certain products and certain markets, I no doubt that fully autonomous selling is maybe even happening to a certain extent today, or is absolutely possible. Do I really want to speak to someone that doesn't really know the product in curries? No disrespect to curries, but this is the retail example I would use myself. But other retailers do exist that do this, where they don't really, understand what you really want. Do they really understand the product as much? Well, I could probably get as much of a qualified assistant on what cable or connection or television even that I want. And it's a low enough cost of that good that means the risk of not doing it with someone and having to have that handshake almost there. I probably wouldn't want to buy a house without knowing the people who had been in it, without having some connection with, a check and balance of doing that. In the world that we work in, there will be certain tools, certain products that you can sell that work in that way and some that don't. But a lot of the BS really comes from, unfortunately, from within. It comes from the sellers and the commercial people that maybe feel defensive about these tools and therefore kind of belittle their input and keep working in a traditional way. And then you get at the other extreme, the people that think the tool's going to solve everything. We bought part of an ABM platform that did other things, a tool that was promised to, coin expression, solve world peace, but it didn't work for 2 years. And so you've just got to make sure that, I think the biggest thing now is identifying what am I trying to improve, and then how do I do that, and then what tool do I use, versus just going straight to, hey, I've seen a cool tool that I really like, but maybe that doesn't solve the friction that's in your supply chain. If you buy a tool that gives you better upfront intelligence about a meeting, yet you're creating thousands of early stage opportunities anyway, but you're just not converting at a late stage. Well, I've bought a tool that just makes the thing that I'm doing really well at better. I need to buy something that helps in this part of my go-to-market. So you need to start with just understanding your end-to-end life cycle, your end-to-end customer journey, and then pick the points where the friction is and set expectations in a reasonable light as well. Like, it isn't going to make you 100x improvement in these things. But a bit like one of our values at Couchbase is, make tomorrow better than today. And it's a really good one for you as a leader, because I live by it, that in times of uncertainty and times of change, if we could just make the thing that we're doing today, if I can make that bit of friction that really pisses the person in my team off trying to do that job, if I can get rid of that, that's made that better. It doesn't mean that I've had to automate everything and make it completely digital. So I think where we get away from the kind of snake oil salesman type approach to the go-to-market tools, no, it's not by the tools providers changing what they're doing. They're doing what all companies would do and try and put their best foot forward for their product, but is really clearly understand my go-to-market, my customer journey, and where the friction is that I can solve.
And I guess this is starting with the problem statement rather than the solution.
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to go and see this shiny new value proposition that claims the world, but then you first need to look within our sales process. Where are we losing the most conversions? Is it at discovery? Is it converting POCs? Is it driving top of the funnel demands? And figuring out intrinsically where those areas are that needs improvement points. Yeah. And starting with those problem statements first to then shape what type of solutions, if any, if AI is even the answer to some of them, humans could be the answer to some of them.
Absolutely.
And it's working out then where to apply additional fuel on the fire to get marginal points of efficiency gain and performance gain. Yeah. And inherently there's leading and lagging indicators within any go-to-market team that they're measuring. And it's also hard from day one to say, okay, this is going to impact win rate, deal velocity, etc. It's starting with, back to your points on the small steps to deliver on the outcome. What are the enablement metrics we can change today? Conversion from discovery to demo per se, that's within our reach, that's then going to compound to those lagging indicators later down the line. And are there any examples within Couchbase of where you've had a successful deployment of go-to-market tech, or on the other hand, where you've had a less successful deployment?
The less successful ones, I think, are where, not to call them by name, but where it's been a larger platform that has promised to do more. The successful tools and where we have been successful are on those tool sets that help with a specific problem area. So if you look at that, go back to that 4 box of discovery. So before I go into a call, if I can know which one of these boxes I'm trying to pitch in, then I'm going to have a much more successful call. So using technology that allows you to have a much better insight into that company. We've then built some models where we'll identify to the persona what sales motion are they most likely to be pursuing in what they're looking to do based on the job they're working on, any background they've done, what the company initiatives are. So at least it's a better starting point for that first conversation, because we feel we've done a good job of setting up the teams to have that first conversation, but it's making it the most efficient one that isn't about doing a pitch, but is really being curious and asking the right questions. So we've adopted some tech that's really helped us in that area. You then have to look at the market and where things are. So a couple of years ago, we've invested in technology that helps massively automate your outbound prospecting process. So your ability to send emails at scale and do all these kind of things. And you make that investment in the 2 years that sees the gradual death of email as a means of communication. And this is probably, I'm not alone, I know I speak to a lot of other people, because you get so many prospecting emails, I treat them all the same in that I just delete all of them, because I need to be clear and focused on, or if I've got a problem, I will do the research. And you build relationships with people over time as well, where you build up some trust and then kind of buy from them. So at this stage, I think that's certainly something that I've done. And, whether it's with with other people, actually having a safe space where, okay, I know the solution that these guys have got and where it will fit, but actually maybe my company isn't ready for that because we've got to fix some of these other issues first. So the successful ones about where you look at your process and you try and, go back to that, where the problem is, you try and fix those. And those are the ones that have been successful. The other place where it's been successful is where it's not just solving one group's problem, but where it helps in the overall go-to-market. So where we were before, and this is something that's very important for go-to-market teams to do, is that you'd have, hey, here's our marketing and tech operations team, here's our sales operations team running that tools, there's finance running some tools, and actually everyone was just merrily getting on and buying tools, and all of a sudden you realise that you're spending millions of dollars a year on tools that have a huge amount of Venn diagram of overlap. So we now have a go-to-market tool steering committee. We have that broken down into different subgroups looking at things, that makes recommendations, that make sure that we make purchases that are in the greatest interest. And some of those, I've been in that situation where I've really wanted to buy something for the sales team, but the priority was actually further back in the funnel that we had to buy some technology to help with our lead scoring. So that was the investment we made. Now, in the old world, we'd have spent twice and not really known where did that lever help or did that lever help. So I think it's just really important to be very aligned with, right from your product team and how you want to take the product to market through your go-to-market on where are these tools going to help, And then whatever tool it is, whether it's a big platform or a small one, you will be much more successful.
And it's almost having that internal repertoire to see where you're investing, what the problem statements are, looking cross-functionally at the Venn diagram to see where the overlaps are and being able to then diagnose. And I think the tooling steering committee is definitely a unique one to Couchbase, which other companies in the market don't necessarily have them. They're still operating in the old way where it'll be one VP that signs it off and gets it closed under discretionary budget and over the line. So I think that's a great way to have a unified, central way of thinking about tools that considers all of the interests of the buyer personas.
And it goes back to the curiosity about it's much harder to, because you could still do that, right? You have steering committees. There's ways around it in most companies of making a purchase, unless once you get to a certain size and scale, there's ways to buy stuff that probably not everyone finds out, or maybe the people you don't want to find out about it do. But the way that we do it is the team I'm working with, we all kind of now generally care and understand about the problems that we're all facing. So I don't want to do something to turn up on the call and then look at the eyes of my colleague and be like, oh yeah, I've kind of pulled the wool over your eyes. So, when it comes to these things as well, just like with everything still, the human aspect and the people aspect is really important of, okay, we've got a great process of how you buy software, but actually being accountable to the other people who are doing that helps us to make better decisions.
Coming back to your point on channels, some say that cold email's dead, and we know it's flooded as a channel. Some say that cold calling's dead. What's your view of what is actually working on the fields, taking away all of this LinkedIn guru nonsense and getting to the meat and bones of an actual sales org and the channels that are delivering results for you at Couchbase?
What's working for us is showing up in the places where our target personas are in as natural a way as possible. So for us, that will be through things like forums, GitHubs, all of those types of things where people are exchanging ideas, downloading tools and products, and hey, is this any good? How does that work? So you want to make sure that you have advocacy through those things. I think even more as we go into the future and we start to get AI native companies in terms of how they do everything now start to be built. Actually, the only way, and this is getting into some of that future stuff, but the only way I think you replace people, you don't replace people in a sales process. You just change who the people are. So in those AI natives, you might not need salespeople until much later on in your process. If you've done a good job of being naturally in those communities and places where your target personas are, and by those people actually advocating for your product, that then builds you pipeline. So I think where we've been successful is trying to make sure that we're very much in a natural place where that person is. So you would do more formal email prospecting to, let's say we're working with a customer that's taken they've got 4 or 5 different apps in different departments. Well, now we want to go to someone, in an executive position in the technology business, say, hey, look, you're using this in these ways. Would love to talk to you about doing more. That is then more of a formal send an email approach. I still think the better way is for one of those 5 people who you're working with to send that email without you even knowing they've sent that email. And so this idea of just being in the place where that user is to try and help them, whether you're commercially benefiting from that now or we will potentially in the future, is where I think is very relevant. Like for the sales tools part, where have I found out about Curvo? Where do I find out about all these other tools? A lot of the time that's through LinkedIn. It's through, connections at events and shows by getting out there at places. Is it by just getting a generic email or even a personalized email that says, hey, we've got this thing that does that? I certainly think a call probably still rates higher than an email at the moment, because if you've got that curiosity in me, some people never answer these calls. If I'm not on a call and I see a phone ring, I'm probably going to answer it because it could be, I try and do yes more than no. So you never know. That call might be, something that's going to unlock personal value for the company. It might just be a really engaging human who you get to speak to for 10 minutes and you never speak to again. But what's the opportunity cost of taking a 5-10 minute call? If you believe in that kind of process, not a lot. What's the opportunity cost of going through maybe the 20, like end of a day, probably, I don't know, between the two kind of junk folders in email I've got, I'm maybe looking at like 50 emails a day. Actually going through those 50 at the end of the day or the start of the day feels like I'm taking time away from things that I should be doing. So I think that prospecting is very difficult. I think that whatever your chosen communication channel, a LinkedIn message, email, call, direct mail came back for a bit before people then went to the carbon footprint of stuff. So there's only so many ways that humans can communicate with each other physically and digitally. It's about the quality of what you do, but the timing just more important. If you know that someone is, a good example for us will be using related keyword searches and then other things to triangulate interest. So if we look at a potential person who's using our software, well, they may have downloaded the software or signed up for a free trial. They may have raised a question on a forum post. They may have responded to a marketing campaign. They may have, and this is all obviously that kind of lead scoring algorithm. But if you understand the important touch points and when the timing is right, then kind of doesn't matter what message you send. If the timing's right, whether it's an email, a LinkedIn message, a phone call, it's in the right space for that person who's going to be doing something. So I think more than worrying about the distribution channel, it's what time, how do I get the timing to be as lined up with when that person's going to be receptive for taking that call, saying yes, or they're at the right time of showing the buying signals and that intent. And that's a great area in which tooling can really help with, is that whole area about intent. It doesn't prove that they're definitely going to do something, but if I walk into a coffee shop, it's a darn sight more likely I'm going to buy a coffee than I am looking for furniture. Now, I might see, oh my gosh, look at that bit of furniture over there. That's that light. And then I'll buy a coffee and ask the person, where'd you get that light? But I'm not going in there for a light. And that's what most people are doing. They're not going in there for, hey, let's see, how's about those databases? Let me see what they are. No, I've got a problem to solve. I need a high-performance database that's got multi-dimensional scaling. Yeah, I know Couchbase has got one of those. I'm going to look at Couchbase. And our job is to know when that time is.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that timing is the most important aspect, and that's where you cut through the noise. If the prospect is in the problem space of thinking about that area and they're thinking about procuring a solution, and you can be there within half an hour. And again, timing is so crucial from when they have that thought to when you reach out. That's ultimately the place where you get the highest degree of conversion, because you get two different camps of prospecting. You get the future-focused ones where you're planting a seed, and Couchbase does this very well with its community building and getting in early where the buyer personas are. And ultimately, the slow burns do transpire into something later down the road. Yeah. And then you have the direct conversions. But I think it's very hard to get direct conversions if they're not in that buying cycle where they're ready to make the purchase. But then equally, getting in early has merits because it might not be a competitive deal cycle at that point. You have the ability to rig the decision criteria or to meander the conversation in a way that better fits the given solution at the time. So I think there's pros and cons to both, but definitely the key takeaway there is that to go where your buyers are and to be intentional around doing outreach, such as, calling, which for us is a great channel. 90% of our enterprise pipeline comes from calling. None of it comes from email. Email only works for other, value adds, where maybe for an event we would send an email as an invitation.
Yeah. It's a follow-up. We're still talking about human interactions that kind of happen a lot of the time. If the first thing you get from someone's an email, I don't know, it kind of sets the tone for, that's a transactional, there's no like getting to know that person. And what you said about the long it's not the long tail, it's the long tongue, I suppose, of the animal. Is like, you've got to just be in the right places. I know that I've bought things to companies along from when I've met someone before sometimes, because you've just built that relationship. And when I know I need that thing, yeah, I kind of trust that person. And there's a good example from one of our sellers who, kind of starting with small initial purchase to now a much bigger one, a broader footprint with that customer. And I remember one of the things that in their Wimwire, when they were writing up, they talked about was how everything was showing the right signals, they were going to reach out. And then they checked their Instagram. Like, they did that extra step of like, oh God, let's have a look at their Instagram. And they could see that this person was clearly about to go and get married. It was like, oh, off to wherever it was, big day, blah, blah. And he just thought, okay, not now. I'm not going to do it like just before they're getting married. They're either going to think a negative thing about me, or they're just not going to do anything at all. And so waited for 3 weeks. Congratulations, hope seeing you're back from. And the person at first was a bit like, hey, are you the stalker or the seller? But actually, they built quite a good, it's like, well, actually, I got married 6 months ago as well. How are you finding this? How did you? And just got a natural conversation going about something that wasn't that. But the timing was right for that person. So it was a targeted kind of use your human intuition and the skills, but it was still about timing. And I do think that, I know one of our sales leaders is talking about the, certainly in the US, the big comeback in cold calling, and that kind of being back in vogue. And I kind of don't know whether it's necessarily back in vogue, but I certainly think it's a more effective distribution than email today, which has just become so cluttered and crowded that if you're not able to spot what is a worthwhile thing for me to read, then most people are probably doing what I do and just going, well, if it didn't make the inbox, then we'll just treat it all the same.
Yeah, and ultimately with email, there's no ability to maneuver the value proposition. You have to make an intrinsic laser-focused value hypothesis that either resonates at that specific moment in time or it goes straight in the bin. And that's the challenge. And that's why cold calling is so great, because you have that meandering ability. If one angle doesn't work, you can maybe try a different one. Maybe you can try 4 different angles in a cold call and one of them resonates, and that then progresses the deal. But I think the key thing here is the signal to noise ratio.
Yes.
As noise amplifies, it's much harder to find signal, and you want to move to a channel where signal can prevail. And this is why I think personally that the AI SDR hypothesis is fundamentally flawed, because as you create more volume, buyers look for signal in other mediums. Yeah. They want the human signal because it shows effort, it shows that they've been thought about and researched, and then they move their signal into in-person events, or they move their signal into calling as opposed to emails. And I think that will be the shift, is buyers will still seek out human signal amongst the noise, and humans are intelligent enough to filter out between the two.
I think so. The human signal part, like I say, is that might there be a time in which the volume of SDRs or salespeople that big companies need would be smaller? Yes, but only if that channel underneath that I talked about of advocacy and your users effectively selling on your behalf, if that's activated, then yes, but it doesn't replace the human part of it. And it is really where I believe that the exciting part of where tools in our space are going to be is less helping in the preparation, is less helping in the after. I love food, love cooking, love kind of learning about different techniques and creating things. The best advice and guidance that you ever have in creating something is when the flame's coming up from the stove, the frying pan's on it, and someone's there saying, do this, try this, have this. Or why did you do that? How have you done that? Why have you selected this ingredient? That in the moment piece, the analogy to our sales world, I can get loads of information that give me a hypothesis of what I should say to someone. I've got loads of tools that can help me automate, put this in my CRM system and put the right fields in and help my forecasting. Unless you do the bit that helps the live interaction, I think the future of that area is going to be less impactful than just helping in the now.
Yeah, and I think that's analogous to match day versus pre-match day.
Yeah.
When you're in match day, the penalties are on, and you've got a decision: does it go in the top left or does it go in the top right? And which direction is the keeper going to go in? If you can have that intuition in 500 milliseconds to say the keeper's in the top right, you need to boot it in the top left, that's what counts, because that makes a difference to the scoreboard. And it's those split seconds moments in professional sports that, again, are analogous to professional selling, where you can directly add the most impact.
The goalkeepers who on their water bottle have all of the which way were their last few penalties, that's the information they've got to give them the thing, right, I'm going to go this way. Some of them don't follow it every time because they follow their gut and save the penalty. Some of them follow it and don't execute because you've gone, like, it's still beating you. But it's just that in the moment, all of that preparation is just helping you execute there. It doesn't guarantee the execution, but it overwhelmingly gives you a greater probability of it being successful. And in sales, when a lot of these things are about the volume of taking this many prospects to leads to opportunities to probability is important.
And I'd also like to talk about leadership, given that you're now, in that role and leading a pretty substantial go-to-market function. What do you think the traits are around being a good leader, motivating your team, and setting the right foundations and patterns for building a successful sales org?
When I get asked about kind of leadership styles and things like that, and how do you, I often use that football analogy. Like, there's always the great footballer who can't be the manager because they can't understand why people can't do that. And that was something that always kind of stuck with me as I tried to build teams. I think where it starts for me, and this is just, again, like, I kind of like people. So that's important because it starts by showing the individuals in the team, and collectively through that care, frankly, put it another way, you give a shit. Like, I care about how those people go home, come to work, show up, what's going on in their lives. The bigger the teams you get, it becomes more to remember, and you might have to make notes on the names of everyone's children sometimes, but it's still important to know that. And I think you want to start with a sense that I care about these people. There's a duty of care, and I want to make sure that their professional existence is as happy as possible. Within that, in the team context, I really just try and do two things. And one is to make sure that we have a shared vision. Companies will have their vision and mission, but sometimes as a team, you don't have to just copy exactly what that is. You have to make sure you interpret that into the world of work that you do. And so making sure that there's a shared vision that's linked to that company vision of, well, how are we going to get to this thing? That's very important. You want people feeling that their contribution matters and that we're not doing this without all the components of this. Now go back to that sales team maybe where you've got someone who's absolutely crushing it. Well, one person crushing it and everyone else in the team missing their number isn't going to make a very happy team. So you've got to make sure that that objective isn't just from a selling point of view, hey, do the number. It's kind of like, well, that's the individual baseline of everything. But actually, what are we trying to do this for? What is that vision? And then when you have that vision, my goal is just to help everyone to do it their way. Everyone's going to have their own style. I've learned new ways of doing things through that approach of just watching people take on a task that, why are you doing it like, oh my God, that took 10 seconds. What, I'm doing that. I remember a lesson that I learned. It was on one of those Oracle sessions. In that phase of, in kind of early 30s, you're kind of in that invincible phase, especially with a company like Oracle doing well. Oh, this is great, And I love having ideas, quite creative, so I was always having more ideas. And it was about the enthusiasm of those ideas. Right, guys, we're going to do this, and very energy. And I remember seeing a colleague of mine, Ian, one of the SE managers, lead this project on one of these leadership teams without doing any of that. There was no rah-rah. There was no excitement. In fact, in some ways, there was the complete opposite. My team that was leading through my style, we lost out to that team. And it just reminded me about how actually your job's not to be the person who has got the most skill or the best ideas or the best talent, but is the person who can help every single person do one step better today than yesterday. Everyone's baseline is going to be different. And that learning progression model that I've used really helps with, like, there's no point trying to teach someone a completely alien way of doing something. You've got to just make sure you adapt it around how they think. And we're lucky these days. You know, we have more understanding about different neuro preferences that people have of how they solve problems, with much less prejudice about that. That means that you can really tap into this idea of that helping people to do it their way is about, like, everyone's got that superpower. Like, let's activate that. And very much, again, my coaching style is, if there's something that, unless it's a fundamental pillar of something that we really need, if there's something you're not as good at, well, let's not fix that. I had a terrible left foot playing football as a kid. They were always working on my left foot. If they'd have left my left foot alone, my right foot was so good I might have actually gone somewhere, but because I concentrated on that. So sometimes focus on the strength within that concept of helping them to do it their way against that shared vision. And for me, that's led to most of the teams I've been involved with feeling just like that, like our team versus my team.
And I think vision is the key fundamental aspect, that everyone feels like there's a common mission that they're inspired to work towards. And leadership ultimately is around empowering the people in the team to get those 1% incremental gains and be the best versions. And I think you touched on a good point around the style there, where you don't want to change the way of working if what they're doing is working for them. And salespeople all have their own style. Some people have a more serious style of selling, others have a more jovial style of selling, and that's what makes them unique and ultimately what helps them to drive results. But if they had to do the opposite, then it would challenge their ability to drive the right outcomes. Yeah. So I think it's embracing that, empowering people and enabling them to be the best versions of themselves.
Definitely.
And was there a leader in your story that you aspired to and looked up to that helped to build your mindset around leadership?
I've had, a lot of great kind of mentors, a lot of great role models to look up to in leadership. I can remember lots of them fondly. There was the one at that time who probably had the biggest impact was when I went from running a UK team to an EMEA team at Oracle, which was, I'd worked in European roles, but much smaller companies. So it was the first time kind of doing it at scale. And, now post-Brexit, one of the things that I used to put in my LinkedIn profile, and it started around this time, was I'd say I'm a European first. Now that got very unpopular around Brexit, and I kind of got mocked a bit more for that through that process. But the person I learned a lot of that thinking from, of that concept, is from a Norwegian guy, Stein Serlian, who was my boss there at Oracle. And the way in which the Norwegians communicate, there's this study around kind of bands of communication. So how much, do you go into effusive communication, the kind of descriptive words you use, hand gestures. And the Norwegians traditionally is quite a narrow band of communication. In the Nordic region, Scandinavian countries tend to have that. And he taught me so much about humility and about being humble and about how you look for credit and reward, without having to talk about it and, almost seek it. And learning from someone from a different culture where the way in which they communicated was much different, much pointed. And at first I thought the guy hated me. I thought the way he used to talk to me, I was like, is he actually like me? The more you get to know through that process, yeah, absolutely. And probably more than a lot of managers, because he cared enough to want to, these things aren't going to serve you as you progress your career here or maybe at other companies. And as I left Oracle and went into a period of trying to find the right place, I think that being humble was the biggest thing that I could take from that. And I'm really grateful to him for probably smacking a little bit of the cockiness out of me at that time, but doing it in a very impactful and ultimately quite a kind way, so that it embedded that change in me rather than made it feel like, like you talked about, if someone does something in a certain way, imagine how disempowering it is to say, look, can you just be less funny in the meetings with the customers? It's like, but I'm funny. This is part of me. The customers like me. No, you want to keep that. But the things that aren't going to serve you, hey, look, you're telling too many. The joke is got to stop. There's boundaries to these things, and I think that the lesson I learned through someone who had the best interest, but were trying to almost take away what you thought was a strength, but actually what gave you greater strength, was a really important lesson for me to learn about how I then dealt with other people that had similar kind of things that I felt I could help them with as well.
I think, humbleness is such an important part in leadership as well. If you're carrying your own ego too much, it's very hard to motivate and inspire the other members of the team. And was that a changing moment for you in working with a Nordic leader and coming around to leaning into the realms of humbleness, and has that then changed your philosophy from there on onwards?
Well, the Norwegian National Day is actually on my birthday, so I always remember that fact. So I always think of that. There are a few kind of impactful learning stages, but I think that's the one that I always look back on as making probably the biggest correction, because it was the biggest thing that would have inhibited my growth. I think in this industry as well, we've probably seen a lot of ego-based leaders be very successful and do very well, and get talked about in fairly disparaging ways in and around that, outside of the wealth that they've accrued. I don't really care about the wealth accrual part of it or the success accrual part of it, but actually what you learn, and maybe now in my 5th decade you kind of get even more of that, is that the thing that I value the most is the out of nowhere bit of contact with someone you worked with 10 years ago, or you bump into someone that you last saw 15 years ago, and you can still have a great conversation and you remember something about that person because you weren't, internally oriented. You were focused more on your external landscape. And that's something that, through that lesson in humility, I think the focus on the external landscape being a really important part of leadership was, definitely the thing that sat with the most impact in my career.
We have a closing segment on this show, and that's to give a words of wisdom to your younger self that you wish you had, a voice you wish you had 2-3 decades ago based on what you've learned today. So what would that be?
Stick with cars. You love cars. You don't love software as much. I probably wouldn't give any words of wisdom to the 30-year-old again, me. I'm not sure they would have listened too well. The version of me that might exist today in the world that we find ourselves in now, because you can only really talk about some of that. I think in the world that we work in the area that I work in today, whether I did or I didn't, whatever job you're involved in, whatever pastime, passion, career, anything, the tools and technology around artificial intelligence, whether that's in agentic AI, Gen AI, whatever flavor of this, is going to come. It's here. It's whether you look at it now today as just fancy maths and a way of taking mountains of data with statistical analysis of getting a better answer out of it, which is why you still get errors and those kind of things, because it's not perfect. But try, experiment, use tools. Don't just look at AI as something that is happening around you or is in your company, but go and experiment with different tools. Use chatbots from companies as a basic example. Use some kind of LLM to ask questions and familiarize yourselves with prompting. Understand how processes in your world might be able to become augmented with agentic AI, and be prepared for that baseline that you operated in as selling. I worked for a company that was an application service provider, kind of what they called SaaS before SaaS. I remember speaking to a guy I'd worked with before about this exciting new thing and doing this. He said, That sounds like a bureau service. I'm sure IBM were doing that in the 70s. That way of, we'd always look back, and I hear it a lot from, oh, okay, this is a bit like cloud. It is a bit like cloud. It's why things like the Challenger sale is relevant again, but it's not like anything else. The baseline that we operate in now is fundamentally different, and you got to accept that every day my baseline might be different. Don't rely on what got you there in the past. Experiment, use, try tooling, and be prepared for your mind to be opened by others, and accept that change is going to happen. You don't have to worry too much about change management and these things if you're prepared to embrace some of the uncertainty. You know, one of the things I'd say now, if I was going to go back actually and say to Stuart in the late 1990s, just sit with uncertainty. It's okay. You don't need to have the answer for everything. You don't need to be definite about everything. And I think today, in the world that we're in now, that's probably even more relevant than ever. So be prepared to sit in uncertainty and make sure that you get out there and you experiment with this fantastic array of technology that we've got at our disposal now.
The AI revolution's here, and I guess change and embracing change is the way forwards. But look, Stuart, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Thanks for sharing your journey and your words of wisdom from becoming a renowned sales leader yourself. And looking forward to showing this to our Funnel Vision audience.
No, thank you, Leo. It's been a great chat. Really enjoyed it. And looking forward to what comes next.
Thanks a lot.